So we're in the middle of the second chapter of the Mishnah of Megillah, and we're really engaged in the halachot related to reading the Megillah itself. And, this is one of the central pieces of the tractate. And we read in the third Mishnah, Umehechan korei adam et ha-Megillah v'yotzeh ba'yedei chovato. From where does a person read the Megillah from and fulfill his obligation? I.e., at what point in the Megillah do you have to start reading? And we learned that the halacha goes according to Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir Omer Kula. Rabbi Meir says all of it. In order to fulfill our obligation, we have to read all of the Megillah. And the rest of this chapter then, or the next portion of this chapter anyway, then goes on with a series of other Mishnayot, which deal with all, with kol, with the idea of, I think of these as universalistic or inclusive. These are Mishnayot which bring everything in. Just as Rabbi Meir brings in the whole of the Megillah, we'll see that these upcoming Mishnayot, and they're poetic because they begin Hakol, everything. They all begin Hakol, everything. There's three in a row that begin. They all begin Hakol, everything, and they all serve, if you like, to extend the scope of the Megillah reading and, in principle, to make it easy for the people of Israel, all of them, to fulfill this mitzvah. So let's begin. Mishnah 4. Hakol ksherin likro et ha-Megillah. All are kasher. I've translated kasher as fit, or maybe it's valid. All are okay. Okay is a word for kasher. Hakol ksherin likro et ha-Megillah. Everybody is kosher. Everybody is permitted to read the Megillah. Chutz micharesh shotev katzan, except for someone who's deaf, someone who's mentally deficient, and a minor. Someone who's deaf. This is obviously someone who can speak, by the way, because if it was a deaf mute, then there'd be no question of them reading the Megillah, right? It's obviously someone who can speak, but he's deaf. And I think the idea is that you have to hear the Megillah being read, or if you're listening to it, you have to hear it from someone who can hear it. So if you can't hear it from someone who can't hear, because they're in principle not fulfilling the mitzvah themselves, they're actually exempt from the mitzvah. Shoteh, well, I think that's obvious. Someone who doesn't have mental capacity, we've seen that very much. Vikatan, and a minor, someone who's not obligated in the mitzvot. We can't fulfill a mitzvah from someone who's not obligated. But other than these three categories, someone who's deaf and can't hear it, someone who's mentally deficient and isn't taking responsibility, or someone who isn't taking responsibility because of their age, apart from this, anybody can read the Megillah. And actually, Rabbi Yehuda goes further. Rabbi Yehuda machshir b'katzan. Rabbi Yehuda says, actually, for the child, it's okay. And the Rambam comments there, that maybe we'll come to the Rambam just before we finish this Mishnah. The Rambam comments there, Hakol ksherin likro et ha-Megillah, Hakol afilu isha. All are fit to read the Megillah, even a woman. In other words, in principle, according to the Rambam, a woman could read for a group of men. And the subject, the Rambam is quoted actually from the Gemara in Arachin, and the Gemara in Arachin asks, Hakol chayavim b'mikra Megillah. Everybody are obligated in reading the Megillah. Hakol ksherin likro et ha-Megillah. All are fit or valid or kosher to read the Megillah. La'atu yimai. What do these statements add? And the Gemara answers, La'atui nashim. They add in women. And then we're going to quote Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi in accordance with your opinion of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Diamar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, who says, Nashim chayavot mikra Megillah she'af hen hayu b'oto hanes. Women are obligated in the mitzvah of reading the Megillah because they too were participants in the miracle. And of course, if you read the Megillah carefully, you'll see that before the king Ahashverosh unleashes his murderous attack on Jews, he unleashes an attack on women's rights. It's as if women and Jews are grouped together in the Megillah as examples of two two underprivileged groups who were taken advantage of, but were protected in this episode. So Akol Ksherim Likrot Megillah. Everybody's fit to read the Megillah, afilu isha, in the words of the Rambam, even a woman. And now we go on to say, Ein Korit Megillah velo malin, velo tovlin, velo mazin, v'chein shomeret yom keneged yom lo titbol ad shetanetz hachama. We don't read the Megillah, or we don't circumcise, we don't immerse, we don't sprinkle. This is sprinkling with the water with the ashes. And similarly, a woman keeping day for day shouldn't immerse until the sun's risen. There are certain things that we only do during day, and we're going to define the beginning of the day, including the beginning of the day for reading the Megillah in the morning, by Hanetz Hachama, until the sun has risen. And the Mishnah then goes on, Vechulan, and all of them, you can see again the word kol, all. The word all is running right the way through these series of Mishnayot, Vechulan, and any of them, or all of them, She'asu Mish'ala Amud HaShachar Kasher. And if any of these things are done after dawn, they're valid. So dawn, Amud HaShachar, dawn is effectively when it first starts getting light in the sky, which can easily be an hour before actually the sun peeps its head over the horizon. So that's the first set of hakols. Hakol ksherin likrot Megillah, all are fit to read the Megillah. Now we go on. Kol hayom kasher likrot Megillah. Kol hayom kasher likriyat Megillah. All day is fit, or is kasher, or is valid. All day is valid for reading the Megillah. And just as in the previous Mishnah, we had a whole list of other mitzvot which seem to fit together with this definition of daytime. So with all day. All day is okay for reading the Megillah. Ula kriyat halel, and for reading Hallel. Ula tikiyat shofar, and to blowing the shofar. Ula lulav, and for taking the lulav. Uli tfilat hamusafin, and for saying the musaf prayer. Again, we're clearly in galut here because we're referring to the musaf prayers. Ve la musafin, and for the musaf sacrifices. We're remembering back to the temple. And now we're going to go right the way back to the beginning of the temple rituals. The confession over the ox. If you bring an ox as a sin offering, you have to confess over it. And for the confession over the tithe. This is the declaration over Maaser Sheni that we make in Jerusalem. Biarti hakodesh min habayit. I've removed anything that's holy from my house. Or we can say this confession, it's called Vidui Hamaser, and we can say that all day. Ula Vidui Yom Kippurim, and for the confession on Yom Kippur, that's the high priest confession. La smicha, for laying on hands of a sacrifice. La shchita, for slaughtering the sacrifice. We're going to go through now the sacrificial process. La snufa, for waving the sacrifice. La hagasha, for bringing it close to the altar. La kmitza, v'la haktara, for kmitza is taking a handful. For la haktara is putting it on the fire. Lam likha, this is pinching off the neck of a bird. Vela kabbalah, receiving the blood. This is before putting it on the altar. Vela hazayah, it's actually sprinkling it on the altar. Ulhashkot, so that's the end of the sacrificial chain. Ulhashkot sota, this is giving the sota the bitter waters to drink. We can do that all day. Vel arifata egel, this is breaking the neck of the heifer. If someone is found dead in the desert and we don't know who murdered him, then we need to measure to the nearest town. And the elders of that town will go out and break the neck of a heifer as a sort of symbolic admission of guilt, actually. And we'll learn this in Sota. And Ula Taharata Matzora, and to purifying the Matzora. So all of these activities, which are carried on during the day, they can all be carried on all day. Just like Hakol Kasher, Kol Hayom Kasher. And now we're going to close actually with the activities which go on at night. Kol halayla, all night. Kasher liktsirat omer ulhekter chalavim ve'evarim. All night is fit for reaping the omer and for burning fats and limbs. I mean, I think burning fats and limbs is kind of obvious because they're burning on the altar all night, right? And if they're if they don't get burnt up in the night, they've got to be got rid of the next day. What is this about reaping the omer? The omer is actually brought in the day, but there's an idea that we need to count these 49 full days. And just as we count at night, when we count omer with a bracha, we count at night. So too was the reaping of the corn for the omer carried out at night. It's taught in the tractate of Menachot. So I think we may eventually get there. But anyway, it's taught in the tractate of Menachot that just as today we count the omer at night, then they used to reap the omer at night, and then they'd bring it onto the altar the following day. And the Mishnah continues, Zehaklal, davar shemitzvato vayom kasher kol hayom. Any matter whose command is during the day, kasher kol hayom, all day is fit. Davar shemitzvato valayla kasher kol halayla. Any matter whose commandment is at night, all night is fit. In other words, we can do it the whole day or the whole night. And of course, I can't help observing that this must remind us of the first Mishnah in the Talmud, first Mishnah in Brachot. Me'ematai korin et Shema ba'aravit. From what time do we recite Shema in the evening? And the Mishnah says from the time the priests come in to eat their truma until the end of the first watch. According to Rabbi Eliezer, v'chachamim omrim ad chatzot, the sages say until midnight, and Rabban Gamliel says ad sheyaleh amud hashachar, until dawn. In other words, for Rabban Gamliel, we can say the night Shema all night. And the Mishnah concludes, and that the Mishnah concludes, v'chol hanechalim liyom echad, v'chol hanechalim liyom echad, mitzvatan ad sheyale amud shachar. All the offerings that are supposed to be eaten within one day can be eaten until dawn. And the Mishnah closing, Kain lama amru chachamim al chatzot. So why did the sages say until midnight? Kadei l'archik et adam min ha'avera, to keep someone far from transgression. But in principle, all of the night is valid for saying Shema, just as it is for reading the Megillah.